Chapter 17. The Emperor's Rage. In the war room beneath the Tuileries Palace, the being that had once been Napoleon Bonaparte stood before his maps of Paris, watching in real time as entire districts were cleansed of shadow corruption. The dark lines that had pulsed with malevolent energy now flickered and dimmed, sections going completely dark as purified souls broke free from his influence. But the rage that filled him was not entirely his own anymore. It was something vast and alien, a fury that had been building for eons in the spaces between stars, and it spoke through his human vocal cords with harmonics that shattered crystal and made the very stones of the palace groan. "Impossible," he hissed, his voice now a chorus of whispers from the void. 51 souls cannot cleanse thousands. The mathematics of darkness are absolute. Entropy must increase, order must decay, all light must eventually be consumed. Yet the evidence before his eyes told a different story. Throughout the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, freed citizens were embracing each other with tears of joy, while the 51 purifiers who had saved them bore marks that blazed with light, so pure it seemed to hurt the shadows cast by his candles. "Sire," came a voice from the doorway. General Murat, still recognizably human, but with eyes that reflected no light. The cleansing spreads beyond what should be possible. The purifiers move from district to district, and each group they save joins them in their work. We are losing control of the eastern quarters entirely. Napoleon turned, and Murat took an involuntary step backward at what he saw. The Emperor's face was no longer entirely human. The features shifted and flowed. "Then we accelerate the timetable," Napoleon declared, moving to a table where ancient texts lay open to pages covered in symbols that seemed to writhe and move on their own. The ritual was planned for St. Bartholomew's feast, but it can be performed at any phase of the moon if we have sufficient spiritual energy to draw upon. He gestured to the maps, and the remaining dark lines pulsed brighter, as if responding to his will. How many souls remain under our influence? Murat consulted a ledger whose pages were filled with names written in what looked suspiciously like blood. "Approximately 27,000, sire. But the purifiers move quickly, and more souls are freed with each passing hour." 27,000. Napoleon mused, his multiple voices harmonizing in ways that made the air itself seem to thicken. Not ideal, but perhaps sufficient if we can concentrate their spiritual energy properly. He moved to the obsidian mirror that hung on the far wall, and his reflection looked back at him with eyes that held depths no mortal gaze should contain. The ancient formulae speak of alternative configurations. Instead of using Paris as a gradual amplification network, we could create a single, massive focusing event. "What kind of event, sire?" Murat asked, though his tone suggested he dreaded the answer. Napoleon's smile widened until it seemed to split his face entirely. "A sacrifice. 27,000 souls offered simultaneously to the powers that dwell in the void between stars. Their combined spiritual energy, released all at once, would be more than sufficient to tear open permanent doorways between our realm and theirs." The implications hit Murat like a physical blow. "Sire, you speak of murdering 27,000 of your own subjects." "I speak of transformation," Napoleon corrected, his voice taking on the lecturing tone he had once used at the military academy, but now underlaid with harmonics that spoke of cosmic hunger. "Death is merely another form of energy conversion. These souls will serve a far greater purpose than their mundane individual existences could ever achieve." He returned to the table of ancient texts, his fingers tracing symbols that seemed to burn themselves into his flesh wherever he touched them. The ritual site will need to be changed, of course. Notre Dame was perfect for a gradual working. But for this, we need something with deeper roots, older foundations. Murat forced himself to step closer, though every instinct screamed at him to flee. What did you have in mind, sire? Napoleon's multiple voices harmonized in something that might have been laughter. The catacombs, mon brave Murat. The ancient burial chambers beneath Paris, where 6 million souls have rested for centuries. All that accumulated spiritual residue, all that concentrated essence of human mortality will serve as the perfect amplifier for our working. He moved to a different map, this one showing the underground network of tunnels and chambers that honeycombed the earth beneath the city. Dark lines had been drawn connecting various points, forming a pattern that hurt the eyes to look at directly. We gather the 27,000 in the largest chamber. Napoleon continued, his finger tracing paths through the subterranean maze. Arrange them in the proper geometric configuration. Speak the words of unbinding, and watch as their life force tears reality itself open like fabric. General Murat felt something human still struggling inside him, some last vestige of the man he had been before the shadow claimed him. Sire, please, these are French citizens, people we swore to protect, children, mothers, fathers. They have families, dreams, hopes. They have nothing. Napoleon roared, and suddenly every shadow in the room seemed to reach toward Murat with grasping tendrils. They are empty vessels, hollow shells filled with purpose I have given them. Without my will to guide them, they would be nothing but walking meat animated by meaningless desires. The shadows wrapped around Murat's throat, lifting him off the ground with strength that felt like the grip of winter itself. Do not presume to lecture me about what they have, mon général. I have seen beyond the veil of mortality, communed with powers that existed before your precious earth was even a glimmer in its star's light. I know what souls are truly worth, and what they can be traded for. He released his grip, and Murat collapsed to the floor, gasping for air that seemed too thin, too cold. Besides, Napoleon added conversationally, returning to his maps as if nothing had happened, the purifiers have shown us something interesting. They believe they can save souls by taking darkness into themselves, by transforming corruption through willing sacrifice. How? Instructive. His smile was terrible to behold. What if we reverse that process? What if instead of taking darkness into the light, we drew light into the darkness? What if we could corrupt the purifiers themselves, turn their own sacrificial love into an instrument of spiritual destruction? Murat struggled to his feet, his throat still burning from the shadow grip. I don't understand, sire. Those 51 heroes, Napoleon said, gesturing toward the districts they had cleansed. They carry within themselves the transformed darkness of thousands of souls. They are reservoirs of purified shadow, concentrated essence of suffering made sacred through their faith. He moved to another ancient text, its pages covered in diagrams that seemed to show human figures arranged in various mystical configurations. What if we could convince them to come to us willingly? What if we could pervert their desire to save others, use their own compassion as a trap? The emperor's reflection in the obsidian mirror seemed to be grinning independently of his physical form. We offer them a trade, the lives of the 27,000 souls still under our influence, in exchange for their willing participation in a ritual they believe will cleanse Paris of corruption forever. But if they participate, Murat began, following the logic to its horrifying conclusion. If they participate, Napoleon confirmed, Their combined store of transformed darkness becomes the catalyst for the ritual. Instead of 27,000 individual souls, we would have 51 concentrated vessels of purified shadow, exponentially more powerful, infinitely more suitable for our purposes. He laughed again, and this time the sound seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the air, from the very foundations of the palace. They would damn themselves and everyone they tried to save, all while believing they were performing an act of ultimate sacrifice. The irony is exquisite. General Murat felt the last human part of himself shrivel and die as he realized the scope of the trap his emperor was laying. How do we convince them to come? We use the one thing they cannot resist. Napoleon replied, moving to a different mirror, this one showing not his reflection, but various scenes playing out across Paris. We give them a target they cannot ignore, a threat so terrible that their compassion compels them to act. In the mirror's surface, images flickered past. The underground cathedral where Cardinal Fesch had organized the resistance, the tunnels where Josephine and Marie Claire had taken refuge, the squares and streets where purified citizens were rebuilding their lives. We attack everything they have tried to save, Napoleon continued, his voice now carrying the sound of wind through graveyards. We reclaim every cleansed soul, corrupt every purified district, and we do it all simultaneously across the city. And when they see the scope of the destruction, when they realize that all their sacrifices are being undone in a single night, his smile was the expression of something that had never been human, that had only worn humanity like a discarded coat. They will come to us. They will beg us to make a deal. And we will give them exactly what their compassion demands, the chance to save everyone through the ultimate act of willing sacrifice. The emperor moved to the largest map of Paris, where dark lines still connected thousands of shadow-touched souls throughout the city. As he placed his hands on its surface, the lines began to pulse with renewed energy, and throughout Paris, 27,000 corrupted citizens stopped whatever they were doing and turned their empty eyes toward the catacombs. "Begin the gathering," Napoleon commanded, his voice now echoing from every shadow-touched throat in the city. "Bring them to the deep places, to the chambers where death has been stored for centuries, and prepare the ritual space. We move tonight." As General Murat hurried from the room to carry out his emperor's commands, Napoleon remained standing before his maps, his reflection in the obsidian mirror multiplying infinitely as if caught between opposing mirrors. "My dear Josephine," he whispered, and somehow his voice carried through every shadow in Paris, reaching even into the blessed sanctuaries where the faithful thought themselves safe. "My beloved wife, hidden in your tunnels of light with your new saint and your ancient crucifix, do you truly believe you can save me?" In the depths beneath the palace, water began to boil in pipes that carried the city's supply to its citizens. Throughout the eastern districts that had been cleansed, people began to feel an inexplicable chill, as if winter had returned in the middle of summer. And in the catacombs beneath Paris, 6 million skeletons stirred in their ancient rest, responding to a summons that had been building for weeks but would finally be answered tonight. "We shall see," Napoleon continued, his multiple voices harmonizing in anticipation, "what your love is truly worth when measured against the void that hungers for all creation. We shall see if your little light can shine in the absolute darkness I am about to unleash." Above ground, church bells began to toll throughout the city, not the regular chiming of the hours, but a desperate pealing that spoke of alarm, of warning, of a final call to arms for all who still remembered what it meant to stand in the light. The final battle for the soul of Paris was about to begin. Chapter 18. The Gathering Storm. In the ancient sanctuary beneath Paris, Josephine knelt before the simple wooden altar, the sacred crucifix blazing in her hands like a captured star. Around her, the faithful had been gathering throughout the day, not just the original 300 who had volunteered for the ultimate sacrifice, but thousands more. Citizens freed by the purifiers, clergy from across France, even children whose innocence seemed to generate its own protective light. But despite the growing strength of their numbers, Josephine felt a darkness pressing against the sanctuary's blessed boundaries, a malevolent presence so vast and hungry that it made her soul shrink in terror. "It's beginning," Marie Claire said quietly, approaching the altar with steps that left faint footprints of light on the ancient stone floor. "I can feel him gathering his forces, preparing for something that will make everything we've accomplished seem meaningless." The Empress looked up at the woman who had become her guide in this supernatural war, noting the new lines of strain around her eyes, the way her stigmata had grown brighter and more painful over the past hours. "What is he planning?" Josephine asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Marie Claire's expression was grave as she took her place beside the altar. "A perversion of everything we have tried to achieve. He means to use our own compassion against us, to turn our desire to save others into an instrument of ultimate destruction." Before Josephine could ask what she meant, the sanctuary was filled with the sound of running footsteps. Brother Francois burst through the entrance, his robes torn and his face bearing fresh burns that looked suspiciously like handprints. "Your Majesty," he gasped, falling to his knees before the altar. "Forgive me, we failed. The shadow, it has reclaimed every soul we purified. Every district we cleansed has been consumed again, and this time the corruption runs deeper than before." The words hit the assembled faithful like a physical blow. Cries of despair and disbelief echoed through the chamber as the implications sank in. 3 days of sacrificial cleansing, 51 souls damned to save others, hundreds of families reunited, all undone in a single night. But it was Marie Claire who understood the true horror of what had happened. "He didn't just reclaim them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He used our purification against them. Every soul we saved carried within it a memory of light, of what it felt like to be clean. When the shadow took them again, that memory became a source of infinite torment. They know exactly what they have lost, and they know it can be taken from them again at will." Cardinal Fesch emerged from the crowd, his face ashen. The suffering in those districts, it is beyond description. They beg for release, but the shadow will not let them die. They are trapped between memory of salvation and the reality of damnation, and their agony feeds the Emperor's power. Josephine felt the crucifix growing heavier in her hands, as if it were absorbing the weight of despair that filled the chamber. "Then we have played directly into his hands. Every act of mercy, every sacrifice made to save them, it has only made their suffering worse." "No," said a new voice from the entrance. "It has made them ready." Everyone turned to see a figure approaching through the tunnel, General Juno, but transformed by his recent ordeals into something that seemed to burn with its own inner fire. The scars on his forehead had spread, forming intricate patterns that pulsed with light that held hints of colors beyond the normal spectrum. "General?" Cardinal Fesch said uncertainly. "We thought you were lost when the eastern districts fell again." "I was there," Juno confirmed, his voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the soul. "I witnessed the Emperor's trap being sprung, saw 27,000 souls being driven like cattle into the catacombs beneath Paris. But I also saw something he did not expect. He moved to the center of the sanctuary, and as he spoke, his words seemed to take on visible form, patterns of light that danced in the air above the assembled faithful. The purified souls remember what salvation felt like. Yes, that memory torments them now, but it also gives them something the shadow cannot touch: hope, real hope, based on actual experience of redemption. And that hope is spreading, even in the depths of corruption. Marie-Claire leaned forward intently. What do you mean? I mean that the Emperor's plan requires willing sacrifice, souls that choose damnation over salvation. But souls that have tasted light cannot truly choose darkness, no matter how much they suffer. The corruption may claim their bodies, may use them as vessels, but their essential choice has already been made. He gestured, and suddenly everyone in the sanctuary could see what he had seen: a vision of the catacombs where 27,000 shadow-touched souls stood in precise geometric formation, their bodies arranged in patterns that formed a vast ritual circle. But in their eyes, barely visible beneath the supernatural darkness, tiny sparks of remembered light flickered like stars in an infinite night. The Emperor believes he can use their suffering to tear open permanent doorways to the void, Juno continued. But suffering that remembers salvation is not the same as suffering that embraces despair. Their pain may feed his ritual, but their hope, however small, will corrupt it from within. Josephine rose from her knees, the crucifix in her hands, now blazing so brightly that shadows were banished from every corner of the sanctuary. Then we can still save them? We can do more than that, Marie-Claire said, her voice taking on the authority of prophetic understanding. We can turn the Emperor's trap against himself, but it will require a sacrifice greater than any we have contemplated. Not just the offering of our own lives, but the willing acceptance of ultimate spiritual responsibility. The sanctuary fell silent as the implications of her words settled over the assembled faithful. Cardinal Fesch was the first to find his voice. What do you mean by ultimate spiritual responsibility? Marie-Claire moved to the altar, her stigmata now blazing so brightly that they seemed to contain fragments of the sun itself. I mean that one of us must go to the catacombs, must stand at the center of the Emperor's ritual, and must take upon themselves the spiritual burden of every soul in Paris. Not just the shadow touched, but all 500,000 citizens of this city. The words hung in the air like a challenge to the very foundations of reality. To take upon oneself the sins and sufferings of 500,000 souls would be beyond human endurance, beyond human comprehension. That would be, Brother Francois began, then stopped as he realized the magnitude of what was being proposed. That would be the crucifixion, Marie-Claire finished quietly. The ultimate imitation of Christ. The willing acceptance of every sin, every failure, every moment of despair, experienced by every soul in Paris, with faith that divine grace can transform even such overwhelming darkness into light. General Junot nodded gravely. And if such a sacrifice were made at the moment of the Emperor's ritual, when all that accumulated spiritual energy is focused and concentrated, it would not just break his working, Cardinal Fesch said, understanding dawning on his face. It would reverse it entirely. Instead of opening doorways to the void, it would create a channel for divine grace to flow directly into our world. Marie-Claire smiled, and in that expression was both infinite sadness and infinite hope. The shadow feeds on despair, on the belief that suffering is meaningless, but suffering willingly accepted for the sake of others, suffering that is offered as a gift of love, that becomes the most powerful force in creation. The sanctuary began to fill with a different kind of light, not the warm radiance they had grown accustomed to, but something harder, more intense, like looking directly into the face of truth itself. Who could make such a sacrifice? Someone called from the crowd. What human soul could bear the weight of 500,000 others and not be crushed? Before Marie Claire could answer, Josephine stepped forward, the ancient crucifix held high above her head. "I will," she declared, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast chamber. "Napoleon is my husband. This corruption began with his choices, and if anyone should bear the cost of cleansing it, it should be me." "Madame, no," Cardinal Fesch protested. "You cannot comprehend what you are offering. The spiritual agony would be beyond human endurance. It would destroy your mind, your soul, everything that makes you who you are." "And yet," Josephine replied with calm certainty, "it would save him. It would save all of them. And that is a trade I am willing to make." Marie Claire placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Your willingness honors you, Majesty, but this particular sacrifice requires something you do not possess: the ability to transform unlimited darkness through unlimited love. It requires someone who has already died to themselves so completely that they can absorb infinite suffering without being consumed by it." She looked around the chamber at the thousands of faces, faithful souls who had risked everything to stand against the darkness. "It requires a saint," she said simply. "Not a saint declared by the church, but a saint created through willing martyrdom. Someone who chooses to love so completely that they become love itself." The meaning of her words settled over the sanctuary, like a benediction and a burden combined. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented in the history of faith, not just the call to martyrdom, but the call to a martyrdom so complete it transcended death itself. "I volunteer," said Brother Francois, stepping forward with his reliquary held against his chest. "And I," said Sister Marguerite, her scarred palms blazing. "Count me among them," called Father Dubois. Within moments, all 51 purifiers who had sacrificed themselves to cleanse the shadow touched were standing together before the altar, their combined scars creating a mandala of light that seemed to contain depths beyond the physical realm. But Marie Claire shook her head gently. "Your sacrifice has already been made, and it has served its purpose perfectly. You have shown Paris what redemption looks like, what love in action can accomplish. But this final working requires something different." She moved to the center of the sanctuary, and as she walked, her simple grey dress seemed to transform, taking on a radiance that rivaled the crucifix in Josephine's hands. "It requires someone who has already walked through the valley of the shadow of death and emerged on the other side. Someone who has already surrendered everything they were to become something new." She smiled, and in that smile was the peace of absolute acceptance. "It requires me." The sanctuary erupted in protests, in pleas for her to reconsider, in offers from others to take her place. But Marie Claire raised her hand, and immediately a profound silence fell over the chamber. "This is why I was called," she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to come from beyond the physical realm. "This is why I was marked, why I was given understanding, why I survived my own dark night of the soul. Not to be a leader or a teacher, but to be a bridge between human suffering and divine love, between individual pain and cosmic redemption." She turned to Josephine, her eyes blazing within a fire. "But I cannot do this alone. The sacrifice requires not just someone willing to bear the burden, but someone whose love for the primary sufferer is strong enough to anchor the working in reality." "You mean," Josephine began. "I mean that you must come with me," Marie Claire confirmed. Not to share the spiritual burden, that would only dilute its effectiveness, but to provide the emotional foundation that makes such love possible. The Emperor's corruption began with his love for you, with his desire to protect what you had built together. It can only be healed by that same love, purified and made perfect through willing sacrifice. The implications were staggering. Josephine would not just be witnessing the ultimate act of martyrdom, she would be participating in it, providing the emotional core around which Marie Claire's sacrifice could transform 500,000 souls. What would happen to me? She asked quietly. You would survive, Marie Claire replied. But you would be changed. The love required to anchor such a working would burn away everything in you that is not essential, leaving behind something new, not quite human, not quite angelic, but a bridge between the two realms. Cardinal Fesch stepped forward, his face grave with the weight of theological implications. What you describe, it has never been attempted before. We have no precedent, no guidance from church teaching about such things. Because it has never been necessary before, Marie Claire replied. But these are unprecedented times, facing unprecedented evil. Sometimes, the response to ultimate darkness must be ultimate light. The sanctuary began to vibrate with a sound that was felt more than heard, a harmonic resonance that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the ancient chamber. On the walls, the carved symbols began to glow more brightly, as if responding to the prospect of such cosmic sacrifice. When? Josephine asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was agreeing to. Now, Marie Claire replied. The Emperor's ritual has already begun. Even as we speak, 27,000 souls suffer in the catacombs while he draws power from their anguish. We must act before the working reaches its climax, or all will be lost. General Junot stepped forward, his scarred face resolute. Then we go with you, not to interfere, but to ensure you reach the ritual site safely. And to bear witness, Cardinal Fesch added. If such a sacrifice is to be made, it must be recorded, remembered, understood by future generations who may face similar darkness. Marie Claire nodded, then turned to address the thousands of faithful who filled the sanctuary. My friends, what we attempt tonight will either save Paris or damn it utterly. If we fail, the void will consume not just this city, but eventually all of creation. If we succeed. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of prophecy itself. If we succeed, you will witness the birth of something new in the history of salvation. Not just the redemption of individual souls, but the transformation of darkness itself into light, of despair itself into hope, of death itself into life. The faithful began to sing, not in French or Latin, but in words that seemed to bypass language entirely and speak directly to the soul. And in that music, Josephine heard the sound of eternity itself, calling her toward a destiny she had never chosen, but now embraced completely. As they prepared to leave the sanctuary for what might be the last time, Marie Claire placed her hand on Josephine's shoulder. Are you afraid? She asked gently. Josephine looked down at the crucifix in her hands, feeling the weight of divine purpose pressing against her heart. Terrified, she admitted, but also strangely peaceful, as if this is what I was born for, what my entire life has been preparing me to do. Then you understand, Marie Claire said, with a smile that contained all the love in creation. You understand what it means to love something more than your own existence. Together, they walked toward the tunnel that would lead them to the catacombs, followed by the 51 purifiers, Cardinal Fesch, General Junot, Brother Francois, and thousands of others whose faith had been forged in the crucible of supernatural war. Behind them, the ancient sanctuary blazed with light so pure it seemed to reach beyond the physical realm itself, a beacon of hope in a world that stood on the brink of ultimate darkness. The final confrontation was about to begin.